The first part of our exposure session together is going to be that's what it's going to be now for the future of the arts sector, equity, diversity, inclusivity, so it's in action. So it's going to be a couple of questions. It's going to be interactive. If Victoria or Julia can know that mic, and we can go around and share thoughts and ideas. I think, as you mentioned, I think there's a collective visioning required in the future of this work. I think from sort of this level, which is responses with its education for me and for everybody who's here and who's also online, but some future things we could do, some possibilities for things. So the first session will be based on these practical questions about where we come. And then let's see. So I'm also really, really happy that you mentioned this idea of something that we're working on and looking at as well, around this idea of community practice. What exactly is involving community practice as we move this particular work forward? What's involved with it, not just for organizations, but also for artists and for small arts organizations. There's sometimes left out of the conversation. So when we talk a lot about facilitations, who's not in the group? Who's not at that table? Because I think those things are really important for us to ask. How do I arrive in privilege as a Black artist? How much do you work? That's a privilege. Up until most recent, I didn't realize I was the only Black artist that went for the joint arts class. That's a privilege. I was just doing that work. And it's not, touting those things. It's about how do I be able to use my privilege and Black artists to think about this in a community. And that's why we do it. So I love also like being those together. I love posing questions about that. So that we will really broaden the scope we have as artists and the future in this particular center. The first question: in what ways are organizations and persons practicing acronyms, equity, diversity, inclusivity? And if you are online, you can drop comments and responses in the chat. They will be captured by Victoria and will read them. I can also comment, so I can also read them into space. So in what ways are organizations and persons practicing equity, diversity, inclusivity?
Yes. Well, I'd like just to make a comparison to different cities, Montreal. I just learned in terms of demographics. Just in terms of demographics, there's a lot less people of color practicing. I mean, in terms of advance, a company, an organization, funded, there are certain individuals. I'm the only game in town. As far as Black artists, performing goes that taps as well. And the other company, I'm not taking other people aren't practicing, that's a big issue. I'm talking about organizations funded for recycled, et cetera, compared to here in Toronto. Well, there's a demographic population as well. And we practice as much as we possibly can. Because to be honest, most of my art, the dance art that I be doing, the dance or choreographer, every dance, basically being a dance, people with white dancers, because I couldn't find enough South Asian dancers. Slightly changing. And now that I'm transitioning and shifting, I'm fortunate enough to find two South Asians who perhaps will take on that role. But two, there was no less. There was no less within that role. Perhaps not in Montreal, I mean, that would be the worldwide search. So just in terms of that, exactly think we're remarkable work here on all the literacy grades and new space in terms of profiling and exploring Black culture in dance. And but there are, I'm just saying at this point, there is huge differences in terms of activity in these groups. And I congratulate Toronto for the activities that you're doing now, numerous wonderful activity.
Thank you. I think you're also hinting at this idea of the difference between inclusive from cities and their relationships to the words, the ways people practice, the diversity of practice, and also organizations working with the spaces. I think that's really important because I think demographics does impact participation.
Just that's where the book with the living for supporting and go back wanting to identify yourself and have your own culture character, depending upon the government that's in power. So that influences what is big for that. What?
And that's great because I think there's also something about how is government and or social bodies, political bodies reflect this concept of equity diversity and how that actually comes back to us.
Yeah, if you're in a certain party in power, less so, obviously. That's it.
I have comments on that all that. And like I said, I do make a memo of the church. In other words, I am not saying the state. I think that needs to be the sense of what it means to think about diversity as it relates to language and not actually favor of cloning structure. Because it impacts the persons from Haiti coming in, the persons from other from African countries, moving from already. So while you can be separates, that's a conversation happening, which should have ended very long time. Because even talking about money politics, we know that Andre pretty much some counts, but as a student, by the same cross balances and athletics. I know this why I'm against it for people, right? But I think there's something to be said about what does epidermis look like in the future when it's also tied to funding, demographics, and people's participating in different communities, but also as is mentioned. First off, as is mentioned by Wendy, I love to connect things. Big up Cassidy and Lucy Winnipeg and Afro Dance Philippines. Because I think that's also, and I mean the time all together because the result is practicing right now is the way in which the Moving Inspirations Festival is happening. And when it happens every 5 years at the anniversary of that organization, to see the diversity of presentation on this particular stage. And he does not have issues around audience retention. That theater, the estimation is filled to capacity. Well, I'm speaking to you now that it is filled. And the imaginative nature of how it's being working and how it's practicing right now is there's a drum on every seat in that particular theater for everyone to participate and drum during the performance. And I think these are imaginative things around how we begin to engage movie persons as audience members coming into community to work within the particular structure of line of dance. So Casimir and Lucy, beautiful stuff. Anybody else? It could be responses, it could be comments based on what I shared before.
For organizations and many organizations, when a lot of things thinking about the board as a system, that is flawed. That we are governed by volunteers, governments that we know what this is not about as well as political, this is across the board. But working within that system, I'm really proud to see boards transform, really become representation of the communities that we're serving, and we think this is a trend across the board. And I'm always very excited to see within our board the groups that come together from different backgrounds and different professions and all over Etobicoke when we discuss and support our technologies. And so that's something to answer the question how organizations are managing the guy and the organization. I think is a great transformation of habits.
Thank you for that. Anyone else before any comments? Please. So the board part is really interesting. Because I also think about how boards doing this particular work actually interact with the organization, right? And the programming of the organization. And should they be also mandated beyond future governing processes to begin to be a part of the organization in terms of not the everyday, right? But the activities. So are they coming out to the activities that are organization, like, for example, Arts Technical is programming communities? Are they being visible in that particular way? Beyond being visible in the organization, how are they working and also showing their faces and that responsibility to those classroom communities and or in programming? And it's something that I actually enjoy as a part of that. We have an engaged board that actually yesterday, both sessions were actually moderated by board members. And those board members actually had the experience in the sector. So then Nicole Hamilton, he develops the wellness and here in arts, who's on the board, we need to moderate that particular session. We had Gary Neal, who was the CSON, so the CSON was a senior retirement network, working with artists, who had a conversation that Rogers is part of, looking at aging in the US. It's looking at APOC perspective. And so it's really important, I think, as we do this work now, to think through how we engage with the words. And even those that may be resistant, particularly, engagement, then it's really important and it provides value to the organization as it begins to look and dig deeper into its equity, diversity, inclusive frameworks. And I think board engagement is a part that is in every single way. And comments on the response to, okay. Let me see what's coming up online. I see a comment here that sometimes acronyms are used interchangeably. The need and the conscious of using them correctly. Yeah, they do. It's called DEI in some places. It's called EDI in some places. And I think the acronyms are really interesting as a knowledge piece. And I like to see, when doing this work, to dig deeper into that. When you say diversity, what kinds of diversity you're talking about? Is that racial diversity? Is it ethnic diversity? Is it diverse arts practice? So I think I think it's also part of the problem with these words is that we don't dig deep enough into them. And to provide some examples in education, it's also, so racial diversity may look at white, Asia, all these things, it's brown, and different things to that. But ethnic diversity does something completely different because race and ethnicity are two. So if someone who's born Jamaican in a country that has 7 ethnicities, there are white Jamaicans. There are Chinese-based Jamaicans. There's South Asian Jamaicans. There's Persian-based Jamaicans. So the conversation has to shift, right? And I love locating that within the context also of Canada and Toronto. Michael Leach is Black and Asian in Jamaica and give $40 million to the mom for that thing we call Christmas. So it's also changing percentage around where exactly this philanthropy happening in the arts. Now can be seen as being diverse. And shifting the landscape of where does sort of persons from or immigrants, especially as well, have the sort of financial capacity to support the arts, and can that also be diversity? Because that's also a beautiful thing. I often say there's equity required that's different for a wide spectrum of persons on gender or sexuality. Not the same thing. So when we begin to look at equity, how are we looking at other perspectives as well? I often say as well, you will never be inclusive. You can practice to be inclusive. You can have frameworks for inclusivity, but you will never be able to be totally inclusive because it will automatically exclude. Right? But you can have that intention. You can begin to have those frameworks and policies. Case in point, Sid Rosenbaum, who is still the ED at Tenderbucks. We were at a conversation in Kingston together. and state boards primarily disability plus justice and math plus justice. And so it said, when you wear glasses, then you are visually good. Because you have to be vision. It means that there are these scenarios that will impede your vision. And push you to not be. And I have to be aware of those things for someone who's not really aggressive and truly. My eyes don't adjust to darkness. So I face my eyes are focusing. So if the lights go off to me and there is no light information in the space, I don't know. Because my retina doesn't use. So technically, I'm invisible to space. I have to be mindful in multiple spaces. Right? And very mindful. Like I know where getting to spaces are exits just in case. And I've been in spaces. And as a performer, I work with people who know lights are off. Grab his hand. Or that talking about equitable frameworks and being inclusive, that there are also the marks and the global ones I don't really see as well because it means that just people lights come back up. So there has to be lights at the quarter line, the center line, not seen by the audience, but can be seen by myself. So I can be getting right. These are the markers. I count stage, I count wings. I know what the markers in the buildings because when you don't, it could be detriment to my health and safety. So thank you for those. Thank you for those things. And this question. Is the work of EDI and all the acronyms related to it still important? And if so, how? And the reason I asked that question, pose that question, is because of, again, what's happening south of the border. I will not favor the raising that into this conversation. We've lost some capacity to understand what it means to be human, which we can have to know the way. And I'm just really not supporting it as it should be. When I have time. But it is the work, and I hear it a lot in the Canadian context as well, around is it still important? Oh, you got these words again and these things again. So it's a question. You can be very honest and open. We encourage both safe spaces. Is the work in EDI, in which is accessing and so still important? And if so, how so?
I ask for your patience as my synapses are trying to articulate the thought. Is the work still important? I think it's been there before we had these acronyms, and it will be here after those acronyms. I've had the privilege of working in the private sector, doing leadership development and working with international companies where cultural awareness and competency was extremely important. And so the work has been there all along. We just call it different things. And I prefer to think of it as transferable skills, because you're going to take this knowledge and wisdom into any kind of work environment or relational situation that you're in. So yes, the work is still important. I think we just have to be careful not to get caught up in weaponized nomenclature, and think about how does it, to what end. And again, forgive me for some terms, because when I kind of switch my brain to the private sector, I always think of reverse engineering. To what goal? What is it we're trying to achieve, and work backwards? And who are the people that we're working with who are in influential positions? Commonly known as stakeholders, but I'm trying to stay away from that term because of some of the history around that. But speaking in a language to where people are, meeting them where they are, so you can help shifting them. And right now, I do think we have to be careful with the terms we've used. and not get caught up in them, because our wonderful keynote speakers spoke to that, how certain terms can limit us or put us in a position of competition or just be manipulated. Well, all we have to do is look at some of the things in the news and how the terms are manipulated. And I'm sure, you know, when you're in other circles, as I often am, someone will bring up a term and be very sarcastic about it. For instance, the term woke. Or, you know, that's one that I know is definitely under attack. And just the acronym EDI or BIPOC. People like to try and twist it into something that it's not. So we have an opportunity here to continue the work and make sure that it's integral to our strategies. And I know in some of the international organizations I've worked with, when I've built these things in as core competencies, and I also try to influence the corporate language so that these things were built into it. So things like core competencies and performance management systems and things like that. You know, smaller arts organizations may not have the privilege of doing some of those things that bigger organizations do, but again, it's transferable. So the work continues to be important, but you know, don't get caught up in the language and think about how does it influence leadership and what is the within principle. There's another corporate term I use. What's in it for me? Because when people who are being resistant see the benefit, they will buy in. So what's in it for them? What is the benefit to the organization? Sadly, how does it relate to profit? Those are things that I've found continue the work and lower the resistance. So it'll always be important. I think the language is going to continue to evolve because we have seen that already. When we do surveys and things, there's terms that we don't use anymore that may be considered limiting or insulting even. So we'll evolve the language, but I find it's important to be strategic and build it into your leadership strategy and find the language that allows you to move forward so that you're not getting caught up in nomenclature. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, that's
And I'm proud of myself for articulating today.
Yeah.
So I thought it makes some sense.
Yeah, I'll take a few more before I comment.
Thank you. Thank you for that sharing. So that's good. That actually maybe think about one probably that more will get angry or upset over the arguments. And when it's happening, the people who put that questions, like, you know, like what choice did they have in life in that context? For example, when we talk about the arguments somehow evoke competitions. So it's mean that the society or the systems has this way of learning that makes them good, and those who, when they receive the arguments, it becomes something offensive. So again, I would like to ask them, you know, in what kind of context, social, not political, politically, that would evoke this negative emotion toward the arguments.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I know a lot of people of color who are just done with the words. And the reason they over the words, people and these acronyms is because you're not seeing, I would argue, you're not seeing the advancement of change from the blank to the words. You're not seeing those questions. And so they do get angry because then they're still, they still feel that they're in a space that they were before. So they're not receiving the same access to funding. They're not receiving the same things. They're seeing a lot of things. And I will be, as I said, I drink a really I have actually taken Canada Council to task on the very same. And long story short, there was 1 year my company Cashewants went to represent as part of the official contingency in Canada that occurred in arts festivals called Fairfest. Significant. It's like the Olympics of the Arts in the Caribbean, the entire Caribbean, and everybody. It's intergovernmental, and everybody comes with their best, right? I mean, in Haiti comes with like 500 people, and there's culinary, there is the arts practices, there's music, there's every single thing you think about, and applied for travel funds, never about significant investment by in the $200,000. And went, came back. 3 months later, not much. And in getting the communication, oh, sorry, there's another organization that went. And so I was like, that organization is not ours. And we were the official contingent. We were part of the official contingent. What went wrong through the assessment process? And literally, for those who know, I ask questions I don't need. I'm not I history. And I was constantly responding, like rolling the game. And the next thing I got was the blanketed media statements. And I said, for someone who is in an organization that there's no other reason why CPAMO moves as a country. For someone in my position in this organization, and also now running against me, this is an insult. Because the blankets, policies, and frameworks that you gave me in my white paper still do not answer the question out. Where did you go wrong in your assessment to give a company that was not part of the official contingent support and not the company that was part of the official contingent support? To this day, was no answer. And I said, do you want me to come to Ottawa and sit on the lobby until I can answer? We'll be on Facebook to have advancing conversations about why this is problem. Right? So I think there are those times when the statements, the policies, if they're not in action, they do not make sense. They're literally just like as a printing piece of paper. And in our work, it's always about how do you enact these things? How do you put them into action every single day? So it's not just strategies around, oh, it's on paper and it exists on some fancy server somewhere. It's not, but how often you update them? How often are you? Do you know how inclusive you are? How diverse you are in programming? Can you actually articulate those things? Because that is the quantitative. So this is the first part of the one, because literally the quantitative analysis of equity, diversity, inclusivity, mentioned. Right? So what are the things that we do to make sure that this work continues? Can we name those things? And can we then go back and interpret them? Because we may also need to look up and move and shift as the needs of the sector move and shift as well. So thank you for that. That's a really good question. And that's, long story short, that's actually an example of why some folks just hold because they see it's not really integrating the practice in the organizations, etc. And that's a challenge, I think, an opportunity and potential for funding models for organizations. I think TAC has done a beautiful job at responding to it with their Black rights section that's separate from the TAC, but connected to the TAC, specific to artists working within Black arts practices. Again, challenging for someone who comes from a country with 7 ethnicities who says, my company should reflect where I'm coming from. Does it actually make how many does it have? But Black cultural expression is not the same in Black nation. So again, distilling the word and the conversations to make sure that we're speaking specifically. Because I want to have South Asian consciousness. I want to have Asian I am from a multicultural space. Korea is Korea. It is not so Asian food. Lomin and chomin is lomin and chomin. I can tell the difference. One is dry, one is more wet. Like, was a different noodle. These are things that we grew up with. Right? So there's also that challenge when you arrive in a particular country space that sees these words and perspectives only in a very narrow context. It is an opportunity to also shift and change those particular things. As we were singing a Slovenian Calypso Shuttle song, as we were setting up, right? So these are the ways in which we put up. And I think I often said, if a country like Canada and what we do with arts want to really understand what it means to be diverse racially or ethnically, study the Caribbean. Because that's been the before Canada started. Right? Those bodies have been existing in such a place, multiracial existence since right after slavery. When the same colonial masters decided, oh, you can come, you should work for 7 years and do what you do, but you're actually going to get all these contracts and you're going to stay. Because you're not going to see you back to your kids, right? So I think that, again, there's all these complexities in those words and also how we think about these racial things that it's problematic, but it's an invitation to also educate. And so I made that note that they're also around so education is why it's still important. Right. This is why the work studies happen within the magical so it does. Because there's a continuous need for education. It's beyond the white papers, it's beyond all those things. It's beyond, as I mentioned, the nitty-gritties of continuing this work to the future. It's going to separate those practical things. And because I have organisms here as well, I mentioned data. Data is one of those things, right? Data says, okay, we funded these many, we're working with these many, let's use sub-regions, these many South Asian companies. It doesn't say what is the form of those particular companies. Is it mathematically? Is it obviously? Is it Kuchiburi? Is it, is it like, is it, what is it? It says blanket things at the top. But as you begin to distill further, you're able to actually understand the many other nuances involved in that particular practice, coming from particular spaces that we identify as salvation. And I think that's when we begin to do deeper work in saying, all right, we see a historical favoring of pragmatism in the South Asian forms. And how do we then support more PVC-based forms, Kuchiburi-based forms? Like those are all these, right? So it's how then we begin to look at equity, diversity, and inclusivity from a lens of funding and support that is based specific to the artistic practice, as they all also emerge in those geographic locations in those practical spaces. As an example, don't be straight, I'm excited. That's the education piece. Any comments, thoughts? The Zoom room. There's a comment that says every work is essential. It looks different for everyone. Smaller organizations may have fewer resources compared to larger ones with dedicated departments, but they often benefit from less red tape and greater flexibility to adapt, implement, change quickly. And that is also mentioned. I think it's a really, really interesting thing when a larger organization, the larger it gets, the more work is required to move the idea of diversity and inclusivity around that organization. And we have experience with that, right? We have experience working with the National Ballet, for example, where our work was, it must involve the director. It must involve all levels of the organization. It must involve the arts. Right? It must involve marketing team, who are promoting it, what they look like, because that gives a different value and also then suggests representation. Right? So whom art is going out as your star, your principal. How long does it take for an artist of color to move up to the different runs of that? You have corpse gallery, you have first soloist, second soloist, principal. How long does it take for an artist of color? Do you have the history of how long it's taking for an artist of color to move up to the rank of principal? How much principal does it take? Right? Are you charting their success in the field from when they left a training institution to see their challenges? Are you beyond signing a contract with them for a particular year? Are you asking them what are their needs? What support do they need in the long term? That may be different from the assumptions of what they sort of use and want downstream. Right, because we're able to really look at supporting the organization, moving up to the organization, and then also from the larger perspective of our world recognition, right? It's like how much education do you require to support the team, the artistic team, to support the vision in a more equitably diverse way? And and that was very good. Examples of like visually you also see that but the execute. We have another example in the National Gallery School, right? He's a participant program earlier, who's now embedded with Equity University frameworks in the American Act. Right, so every day they've hired so I think let me see, I think Natasha is online. They've also created a position for someone who looks specifically at this. What does it mean to be a forward-facing organization in a project community that's represents also other values? Right? When you look at a field that's in favor of two gender relationships in the United structure of the male and female, and lefties and terrorism, right? Can those things change? And I mean, what I mean, I can subject to national bias. My catchment office is next door. I companies launched there with a great teacher being working with the company. But I'm saying to say that when it really made sense was really, again, also in that organization, looking and working with training and having you train and having your inspectors. And then seeing that in performance maybe by Jira with on stage, where it's just amazing, right? Because that's the first space that's the thing to actually work is seeing as an honest. They may not know all the rules in the organization to make that happen, right? So I think it's also an invitation in this process to talk about what's important and why actually communicating the lessons and the learnings in equity, diversity, and inclusivity is also very important because of the transparency in that, and that can go on outside. That can go in a Instagram post. That could be small things to say, no, we're part of this process, we're part of here, we're here, and now we're clear, we're still learning about what it means to equitably support, equitably represent, equitably. There's so many ways that you could use it as a tool for the advancement of the work in the future. I love this. My synopsis. It's so great. Next question. Are you having any responses? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at branding and helping artists to tell their stories. And I think helping artists, well, artists are experts really in this way. And we talked about what language used and how can you tell those data stories and how can you, as you said, tell the stories of transformation as a means of changing the narrative of that. Yeah. And yeah, it's artists really help us with teams in persuading, shifting views in perspective.
Thank you for sharing your guidance. Yeah. I just really yes, I agree. And I think it's also shifting the perspective of what's most important. Is it the arts organization or is it the artists that they work with? And the ways in which they work with those particular artists. And I think it's it's a small example because it's a small pop day. This is basically the brainchild of me as programming for so many years, the festival and the conference. And it's really interesting when you send an email to artists and say, they successfully focus. What I have to do? What I need to do? And I was like, you have 20 minutes. You're successful. There is no stipulation to 20 minutes. If you want to come in and call it come and be part, if you want to come and stand in space for 20 minutes, you have 20 minutes to do anything that you feel best represents your artistic practice. Fill out a text sheet, say what you want. It's minimal text. So it's really interesting because also from my relationship with those particular things, I realize that artists are also always asked to do so much. There's always asking, you can't do this work, do that work. I want to program this work. How do we provide space? In our world, in a city, in a country that has a space. So you get to decide what this represents you as an artist. And I think there's also that shift and that continuation from the organizations in this work to think about. Many years, we have tons of publications. Shameless plug, that actually is in this head as well, and then design by Victoria and Community and Curator of Communications. And one of the publications we did was around how to create contracts collaboratively. Here's a form for a contract. Some clauses, and you have some artists, especially one for this festival, who like this clause says, draw a line through the clause, type the word what you want, sign it, and send it back to them. And just experiencing the trepidation of them finding that voice. And I'm like, we had that was something we did maybe 10 years ago. Just how do we, as an organization, how do we begin to work collaboratively with marginalized artists and arts organizations who have a different way of approaching contracting or signing contracts or all these things, right? What assumptions are we making? And I think that for me is a very equitable way of looking at working with artists and creating contracts and moving through, as the comment said, in a very, very nimble way to achieve the things that is most important, which is showcasing artists. Question: what are some of the ways in which this work could change in the future? And we can be imaginative.
So what work? Sorry.
So what are some of the ways in which equity, diversity, and inclusive frameworks, practices could change in the future? So I'm encouraging imagination.
I'm speaking to a colleague of mine, Phil Project, who told me that she bipolar is identified as having a disability. So the council. And that kind of, wow, I didn't expect to see that. Maybe that's my judgment as well. There's a supervision disability, obviously. I'm just saying that I didn't expect to hear that. I'm a bit surprised. Now, I want to be clinically diagnosed with ADHD. Would I also be considered having a disability as well? Could I also, I don't know that. There's so many ranges, also autistic ranges, spectrum, and what is considered a disability that I think ADHD is enhanced, by author or anything else. Many artists have similar well, many others also have more role as well. So I think there's a change in the shift that I didn't expect a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I think considering health and mental wellness and physical sort of capacities for employees and staff is inclusive work. It's something that in the sector we sometimes don't have the sort of framework and capacities to execute effectively because we never thought about it. Right? We also don't have the resources to dig into, especially for smaller organizations, to really unpack those complexities. And it's something I think could be added to and could be broadened in the future of the diverse and inclusive work because it broadens that framework around inclusivity. It broadens the capacity for attention span. It broadens those things like, we're in a 3-hour meeting, and you're like, we're so 1 to 3 hours. You're like, no, but actually probably doesn't achieve all the things. Right? What things you need to advance into like documents, what things you need to advance into the Zoom space and the physical space for the well-being of the arts workers, the artists. What effect you can need, and it was mentioned today as well in the conversation about can we find out those things we feel alive in space together? So that when we're in space, we know exactly what the needs of how that space is going. What's going to look like? How are we going to execute in that particular time things that we need to execute? Because we know, all right, we need to find the here. Or we know that you can just get up and move and there's good. I find it interesting when cancer. And so I do this example in the space where say, I'm going to go. You go. You just spend 30 seconds getting my attention I'm teaching before you get to ask permission to me. You gotta go. Go. Come on. Right? We heard this today around balancing the side of an exit and entry strategy. How much time do you give for artists to enter the space before they start with the space? Because that ritual of entry is different for you. That ritual of exit is also. So that an inclusive way of thinking about creation and about working in space. I require 30 minutes at the beginning to just go. The TTC is unreliable, strategy. Streetcar was up. All these things are really, really importantly, the outer parts impact the work of the parts. So how do we then care and learn as at the center? So therefore, we're able to do the work that is also lifting. If you ever saw, Charlton and I've written in the previous publication or 2 publications about what does it mean to be Black consultants working with primarily Black organizations. We called, and the entire book is publication was called Living Skin and Him. What are the questions you get? Right? The pushback, the questions that the microaggressions we get. So we put the choices in with CPAMO, it's very true, because it's so about him. The microaggressions we got as subject matter experts who happen to be Black, cisgender, but there are these assumptions that people don't know about, so they need to. The pushback we get sometimes doing this work. Talk about mental health and physical health. Like, I need to step away, or I could be virgin making this phone. No. Do you honestly being microaggressive right now? You understand the way which you're framing that as, is this a language? Yes, Papa is a language. It's a combination of a colonized language, 2 of them, English and Spanish. And then Africans say, you know what? No. And so yes, it involves tree because it says has yam, and it has Spanish, it says me. And it says, I don't know, you don't know. So yes, it is a language. What would happen if you had a roster in your diversity framework that is about diversity languages? And you know, as employees in your organization, how many persons speak another language? In case persons come into the space where English is or French is not their first language. Because this learning, when we work in the States, often says everyone should leave with a meaningful experience. And maybe by having a roster of diverse languages in the great organization, and empowering employees to like, yes, I can use a second language, I can get over that. And then you have a way of mitigating conflict or allowing the people to feel welcome in the learning space. Yes.
You brought up a good point earlier about the dance, the ballet organization having a specific role that championed, I guess, looking into the complexities and how to navigate successfully this initiative. Being to share those experiences that this role had in that organization. I don't like I wish to be able to talk to that person and see what challenges did they have to face. Were they successful? Like, how did that experience actually play out? Because sharing those experiences to create other champions that can do this successfully in different types of organizations and fields, I think that's kind of the missing piece too. But we need to have more of these people that really truly understand how to navigate that well. And that's going to be based on people having done it before. So I don't know how successful that role was, or it's just something that's developing still.
Definitely. I just messaged directly to Natasha. Unfortunately, we don't have all the typing comments from that were offered. Sadly, Natasha, I am trying to figure out how you speak on this. Well, first off, Natasha was invited to be a keynote a couple, 2 years ago for the conference and festival. And her keynote is published from the publication. So there is a written form for it. She is online, but we just don't have the capacity. Do we? So Natasha, I think we're able to we're gonna make it work. And it's a really good, yes, I think we need more examples of transparency as well. Organizations who've been doing this work, and that's why I'm gonna love this day a lot, because the next session will be the qualitative pieces. What are the stories from the organizations that things that are happening that they've experienced and as the examples of their work. But it wasn't a very important point. Let's see. I will come to
Hello, can everyone hear me? Yes? Oh, great. Hi, everyone. So sorry I was unable to join in person. That was my intention, but I injured myself. And so I am at home today, but I'm glad that I was able to join you all remotely.
So, Natasha, the question was just evidence of your work with the National Ballet School and hearing some of the stories around your position, the role, and what it means for the organization.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll clarify that I specifically work at Canada's National Ballet School, not the National Ballet of Canada, because sometimes those two organizations are confused. So I'll just specify that. I can't really speak to the National Ballet of Canada company. I can only speak to the school. But I think in regard to, I think part of the question was the effectiveness of my role and what sort of my experience has been. I think a key indicator is that 4 years when this role within the National Ballet School was created, it was at the initiation of leadership. So of the executive director and artistic director. And I think that That is important because in order for me within my role to be empowered and enabled to work towards affecting change around EDI, there needs to be leadership buy-in. And I think a lot of my colleagues who are in similar roles at different arts organizations experience a lot of challenges both in doing their work, but also experiencing burnout themselves when they don't have a partnership or they don't have support from leadership. So I think um, we spent a lot of time, even as I was developing my role because it was new, um, with leadership also spending time to work with me and other consultants to deepen their understanding and awareness of whether it's anti-Black racism, anti-racism, discrimination, truth and reconciliation, decolonization, etc. They made a significant concerted effort to also do that work themselves. So I think as I've been embarking on looking at things from a framework, developing an action plan, I'm not saying that it was easy, and I'm not saying that I wasn't met with challenges along the way. Of course, I was. But having their commitment to this work happening at the same time, them building their capacity at the same time, helped to um, when challenging conversations had to happen or when there was discussions around disrupting certain systems, rebuilding certain systems, dismantling certain systems. Those are really challenging conversations. So it does require capacity from leadership. It doesn't mean that leadership needs to be the subject matter expert in designing these frameworks or these action plans, but they do need to be able to um, have the capacity to engage and understand. And like I said, it's been a windy road, and there's been lots to navigate. So it has by no means been perfect. But I think it is a partnership between leadership and whoever is in this role. And also, this role needs to be in a position in the organization where they're at decision-making tables. So my role became a part of the senior leadership team so that this role, not myself personally, but this role or whoever's in this role is a part of those um, organizational conversations. And that I don't think we rarely have a conversation at the senior management table where there isn't a consideration around EDI or something around equity is a part of that conversation. So it's important people in my role are there and able to do that. And I think in regard to anybody in my role as well, you need support or that person needs support. And so I've been so thankful for all the different people that I've worked with to support me in doing this. Kevin himself and CPAMO, as well as the Kojo Institute, AC Mensa, Christine Friday. I've had so many amazing colleagues that are both artists, but also EDI advocates and experts. So personally, anyone in my role, or if you are interested or considering having somebody in your organization in a similar role, you need to give them resources in order to do this work. It can be um, very challenging, potentially isolating. It can be a lot, especially when you are a marginalized person doing this work. It can be extremely personally challenging. So ensuring that person has resources and colleagues that they can work with is really important. So I hope my answer is helpful.
Thank you. Definitely. And I love it. And it's not pushback. It's actually yes. And I love it when we also go for the big things. One of the most effective things I've seen in all relationships and work together was science based around the school about an EDI purpose. So some like if you have questions with EDI, call so contact Natasha, contact so. And it was really, really beautiful and really, really tangible to see these things throughout the school. Because for racialized students, they have a point of reference that could then be channeled back to other aspects of the organization. And I thought that was just a really, really beautiful and effective way of grounding some. Do the retention work. Questions around EDI, also sort of emails. And so that's another example of how to proliferate between organizations in different ways. And as Natasha mentioned, this idea of like establishing resources for the organization. I don't think we're too small to find things online, find other different publications, find ways in which we can animate the space. And I think all works organizations are that. Something else that we do not in Canada very well is actually think about where performing arts and research marry as a one thing other than second. So that's when you guys in these states for 7 years and you want to about the universal system as well. I think resources do help. You point. I think if you point them to some resource in your own organization, that's a benefit for your organization. It's not good. Because that's a meaningful experience for someone. Then we have questions about what I was doing attention. I was giving information. That was the communication. And I was told we had 5 minutes. I know we want to see something, so I will offer the spot to the co-minutes.
I think it just goes with your starting question was continuing, what's the importance of continuing EDI work? And that I think is bottom line is that it is so much surface stuff, but there's still, I think we've got to go deeper. And we've got to move all those statements into text. And then to your thought around, sharing, people who are doing work sharing, to me, that's where the community practices, which I'm excited to kind of see where CPAMO does kind of move forward. Even through the POC, the POP trainings, the program, seeing how that can be become a community practice where you can share the things that have worked, and then you can then take pieces from others and see like, oh, okay, let me try it this way in my organization, or with my practice. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. That's a great point. And a great segue into what will happen also in the because I do believe this is how we community practice. And I do believe it's actually something that we do not do very effectively in Toronto, across Canada, the shared practice. And I refuse to say best practices because it may be amplified and shipped for a different organization, but shared practices. And I think that may also lead into larger things around funding. Around that ownership, and I think going back to what I mentioned from the beginning, if we're all part of this biodiversity, then we're also sharing our nutrients to the others to say, try this, try that. And I think I heard this last night on the program I was watching on YouTube that we should invest more, not so much in the product, but the process and the practice. And so I'm also thinking of an offer with that as well. And that's why, CPAMO program, it's not about us being the work for organizations. It's the process of educating and working with organizations to understand and to educate themselves in the process. The processes that CPAMO also go through this type of work. And bring this conversation, which was a workshop, which was so many things, to an end. And thank you. We've heard great things, and this can also be something that's in that helps us when to get some of these around the conversation. That's actually the intention. The questions and what they mean and on them. So that way we're beginning to amplify our workspaces and our ideas and our practice with a plethora of reasons so we can continue this work forward. And as mentioned, collectively in partnership. All right. Thank you so much.